Iran's oil exports once exceeded 2.5 million barrels a day, enough to power entire nations and shape the global economy. Imagine dozens of supertankers leaving Iranian ports every week, their cargoes destined for cities from Beijing to Berlin. When sanctions or conflict restrict this flow, the world feels it instantly. Oil prices spike, and economies scramble for alternatives. Iran's energy resources are not just economic assets, they're tools of geopolitical leverage. The country's vast reserves give it a unique power, the ability to influence global markets and international relations with a single policy shift. The Strait of Hormuz, through which much of this oil travels, is the world's most critical energy choke point. When Iranian oil flows freely, global relations are stable. When it's choked off, tensions rise worldwide. Understanding Iran's oil power is key to grasping why its every move commands global attention. The world's dependence on Persian Gulf energy gives Tehran leverage far beyond its borders. Iran's geography and geology make it a nation whose actions can trigger prosperity or crisis across the globe. Iran's economy is built on oil, its lifeblood and its greatest vulnerability. High oil prices mean stability and power for Tehran. Sanctions or slumps bring strain and unrest. The U.S., though not a major importer, is deeply invested in keeping Persian Gulf oil flowing for its allies and the global market. American warships patrol the region, acting as guardians of maritime security, especially through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's biggest customers are in Asia, China, India, Japan, and South Korea, nations that rely on steady energy imports. This creates a tangled web. U.S. allies depend on Iranian oil, complicating efforts to isolate Tehran. The real dynamic is a triangle: Iran as producer, Asia as consumer, and the U.S. as security provider. Any U.S.-Iran friction sends shockwaves through global capitals. Sanctions on Iran force America's allies to make tough economic choices, adding volatility to the situation. Iran's oil is more than a commodity, it's a linchpin in a global puzzle of power and survival. The world's energy security is inextricably tied to Iran's fortunes. Every move in this triangle has global consequences. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, 2-mile-wide shipping lane, yet it carries a fifth of the world's oil. Iran's northern coastline and strategic islands give it the power to monitor and threaten all maritime traffic. The Iranian military can disrupt shipping with fast boats, missiles, or mines, no massive navy required. It's not just oil. Qatar's liquefied natural gas also passes through, making the strait vital for both energy sources. Any disruption here triggers a dual crisis in oil and gas, with ripple effects across global supply chains. The world's economic stability depends on this slender waterway remaining open. U.S.-Iran tensions make every threat in the strait a global concern. The geography ensures that local rivalries have worldwide impact. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most dangerous and important stretch of water. U.S.-Iran tensions have surged, with the Strait of Hormuz at the center. America's maximum pressure campaign, sanctions and military buildup, aims to choke Iran's oil exports and force policy changes. Iran sees this as economic warfare and threatens to block the strait if it can't export its oil. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet patrols nearby, ready to respond to any attempt to close the waterway. This military standoff raises the risk of miscalculation. One incident could spark a major conflict. Iran's Revolutionary Guard uses asymmetric tactics, seizing tankers, harassing ships, and conducting drills to show its disruptive power. Each side's moves escalate the cycle of threats and counter-threats. The global economy hangs in the balance, dependent on the free flow of oil through the strait. The standoff is a high-stakes chess match at the world's energy choke point. The Strait of Hormuz has a long history of crisis, most notably during the 1980s tanker war. Iran and Iraq targeted each other's oil exports, turning the Gulf into a war zone for shipping. The U.S. intervened, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers and escorting them with warships, leading to direct clashes with Iran. Incidents like the mining of the USS Samuel B. Roberts and the downing of Iran Air Flight 655 showed how quickly local tensions could draw in global powers. More recently, after the U.S. withdrew from the nuclear deal, mysterious attacks on tankers and the seizure of the British-flagged Stena Impero highlighted Iran's willingness to disrupt shipping. These actions are calculated, disruptive, but just short of all-out war. Iran uses the strait as leverage when it feels cornered by sanctions or threats. Its maritime brinkmanship is a warning. Threats to close the strait are real and can escalate rapidly. The pattern is clear. When pressured, Iran turns to the strait to retaliate. Each crisis risks drawing in outside powers and threatening the world economy. The history of Hormuz is a history of brinkmanship and escalation. The waterway remains Iran's most potent tool for asymmetric retaliation. The past is prologue. Tensions here can explode with little warning. To keep the strait open, the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet maintains a constant presence, ready to deter any threat. After recent tanker attacks, the U.S. formed the International Maritime Security Construct, bringing together allies like the UK, Australia, and Gulf states to patrol the region. Not all U.S. allies joined these efforts. Europe launched its own mission, AMESO, focused on de-escalation and independent from Washington. These coalitions reflect a global consensus: the strait must remain open for commerce. Yet, more military actors in a tense area raise the risk of accidental clashes. The combined presence is a powerful deterrent, but also a source of complexity. The world's economies depend on this fragile security arrangement. The stakes are high and the margin for error is slim. Iran's leaders have made their position clear: if they can't export oil through the strait, no one else will. The IRGC Navy warns that any Israeli presence in the Gulf will provoke a direct response. These threats are meant to raise the cost of sanctions and signal Iran's readiness to act. The growing ties between Israel and Gulf states add new flashpoints to an already volatile region. Iran's threshold for action is lower than ever. What was once tolerated may now trigger retaliation. The risk of miscalculation or escalation is real, with global consequences. The world is one decision away from crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. A blockade of the strait would send oil prices skyrocketing, potentially doubling or tripling overnight. Gasoline and diesel costs would soar, hitting household budgets everywhere. The impact would ripple through the global supply chain, raising prices on everything from electronics to groceries. Industries like airlines, trucking, and manufacturing would face crippling costs, threatening jobs and growth. Farmers would pay more for fuel and fertilizer, driving up food prices. Developing nations would be hit hardest, but even wealthy countries would feel the pain. A sustained closure could trigger a global recession and social unrest. The security of this distant waterway is directly tied to your economic well-being. Our interconnected world means a crisis in Hormuz hits home for everyone. Iran and the Strait of Hormuz remain at the heart of global energy security and global risk. Iran's oil reserves and the geography of the strait give it leverage that shapes world markets and politics. The cycle of sanctions, threats, and military posturing keeps the region in a state of permanent tension. Even a brief closure of the strait would send shockwaves through the global economy, raising prices and threatening livelihoods. The world's dependence on this narrow waterway is a stark reminder of our fragile interdependence. The challenge is not just about oil, it's about the balance between war and peace and the stability of our modern lives. Understanding these dynamics is essential as we look to the future of energy and security. What do you see as the path to de-escalation, and how can we prepare for a more secure energy future?